Welcome to the Iron Self podcast, where we jump into health, fitness, mindset, and becoming the best version of yourself. Today with your hosts, Mike and Kayla Minion. Welcome back to the Iron Self podcast.
Hey guys.
So on today's episode, we're talking about how to whittle your middle, how to get a smaller waistline.
I want to start out with a huge caveat to begin with and say that spot reduction does not work. So if you have this belief in your head that by listening to this podcast, we are going to take you from a size 34 down to a size 22 today, that ain't happening.
Oh, man.
Love you guys, but I can't make it happen.
Well, the first thing that you can do to get a smaller waist is begin listening to this podcast.
100%. Tons of information on that.
So...
starting with the big, right? So smaller waist, for the general population, calorie deficit's going to be your best friend. Because you really do need to start to hone that in to be able to get that smaller to begin with.
Yeah, so a lot of people, the old adage is, you know, your abdomen comes from the kitchen, comes from the foods that you're consuming. So one of those big things is reducing the inflammatory foods that you are eating. So I'm not saying going on an anti-inflammatory diet because that might mean something different for each person specifically, right? What might cause inflammation in your body might be different than what might cause inflammation in my body. But what I'm saying is reducing the inflammatory foods. And we know that the inflammatory foods are your hydrogenated or cooking oils, such as, you know, shortening, butter, those kinds of things that are going to be a little bit more, they create inflammation in the body. Yeah. And then your processed foods. So those are the big ones that I would start to do away with and start to see how that impacts you. From there, maybe we start to reduce down the dairy that we're having or the gluten that we're having and starting to pay attention, because it's not that it is a gluten or a dairy intolerance or allergy. It might be a sensitivity, and time again, we are seeing that these foods are causing inflammation even in people that don't have an allergy or sensitivity to it.
That's not saying that every single person that eats dairy or gluten will have a reaction that will make them bloat or anything like that, but it is one of the most common things. So like when we're looking at people's diets when they're starting and they're like, oh, my belly's always bloated, this, that, or the other thing. A lot of times it could just be dairy or gluten. Those are two of the big things that we see all the time.
Well, and it comes back to the way in which your body processes food. So I know we put Mike on a low FODMAP diet. FODMAP is an acronym for the different kinds of starches or
starches
sugars
that create like alcohol,
gas in your system.
In your stomach.
And so the FODMAP diet did help us start to dwindle in on the types of foods that were really causing inflammation in your body.
Dwindle in, I like that.
Oh man.
Sorry, I love you. Another thing that we can think about of getting a smaller waist is that visceral fat. And a lot of visceral fat actually comes from our stress levels. So when our stress levels are heightened, then your body starts to create these fat around your organs to keep you safe.
So lots of the time, if we do skin fold caliper measurements on somebody and they have a lot of visceral fat, so fat underneath where their organs are versus like what we're going to call subcutaneous fat, which is like the fat you can grab onto on your skin. When they have that visceral fat, we can't pinch that. So it's not really quantifiable. So what happens is that as you begin to lose this visceral fat, your subcutaneous fat
starts to hang
it starts to get hangy. It starts to become more pinchable. And that is actually the healthier fat to have, is the pinchable kind versus the visceral fat that packs around your organs. And so a lot of people get discouraged. They're like, oh, well, now I'm getting this hanging abdomen. It's like, no, this is actually really, really a good thing, because that visceral fat makes you more susceptible to metabolic disease, to
heart
hypertension.
Disease, yeah.
Like, I mean, I could go on and on and on with a list of things that it really does increase your...
But a lot of visceral fat comes from your hormones and from your stress levels.
Well, and some of it's genetic in the way in which your body does store fat. But yes, you're very right. And it can come from also an overconsumption of those hydrogenated oils.
Yeah,
right?
Come back to the inflammatory foods.
Coming back to those inflammatory foods, or maybe the foods that don't necessarily make our bodies feel their best. And alcohol is one of those inflammatory things. And I think that we underestimate the impact that alcohol has on our body. And if you are a very fit individual and you do consume alcohol, you may be hyper aware, kind of like I am. When I have a drink, I know for the next 2 days, my body is sluggish. I feel sluggish and I can't give it my all in the gym. And that is a sacrifice that I need to make when I do decide to have a glass of wine.
That I need to make. I must make it for the wine.
But that has to be something that I have a conversation with myself. Is like, okay, am I willing to feel a little bit sluggish, a little bit extra bloat for these next 2 days after this?
Yeah. Well, and and again, that's that being very honest with yourself, with your goals, and with what you are choosing to consume.
So the other piece of this with whittling in your waistline, so we've talked about diet, we've talked about nutrition, which are huge, but come back, let's look at your exercise. What are you doing to get a smaller abdomen? And this is going to open a whole can of worms, because I know that depending on the person, the exercise is going to change. So Mike has diastasis recti. Diastasis recti is a separation of the abdominal wall, very common postpartum. But
I didn't have a baby. I lifted a giant person out of a vehicle.
Okay, so it can happen to both men and women. It is more commonly seen in women, but that doesn't mean that it can't happen on both sides of the spectrum. So the strength training program for his abdomen is going to be way, way different than mine, because I don't have diastasis recti. So with diastasis recti, we don't want to be doing that forward flexion or that curling inward motion, because it's going to compound the effect of that. It might increase the tear, and it increases the demand on the muscle that isn't strong enough to take it. So we might do more things like planking or things like butterflies, some Kalabati breathing, different kind of breathing techniques, and to start to strengthen his obliques, to strengthen the transverse abdominis and the other muscles, to allow that rectus abdominis the time to heal and recover.
Yeah.
Somebody that's had, say, a C-section, the training program for them might look very similar to somebody with diastasis recti, but it's going to depend on, do they have that function of their lower abdomen? So many people that have had a C-section tell me they cannot feel the muscles of their lower abdomen.
Outside of people that have had C-sections, there is a huge portion of the population that doesn't know how to engage their lower abdominals. When you tell them, like, we need this to get hard down here, and you're like poking, and then we try and finally get them to do it with their breath, that's normally the first way that you can get somebody to actually fire down there, is just through the breathing.
So a lot of people underestimate breath, right? We think, oh, okay, yeah, your breath, yeah, we all breathe, and you automatically breathe, right? Like your body, it's a part of your autonomic nervous system, but the power of your breath is huge. And so one of the very first things we do with a lot of clients is teach them how to breathe. If you cannot breathe into your diaphragm, and what I'm saying is, like, put your hands on your rib cage. When you breathe, does your rib cage lift up or down, up and down, or does it expand out like an accordion? So if you can put your hands on your ribs and you can expand that rib cage into your hands, that's called diaphragmatic breathing, right? And so that's using your diaphragm accordingly, because your ribs should expand outwards. Most people, their ribs come up and down, and that up and down means that we're breathing more into the upper respiratory system, or people will call it belly breathing, where they're breathing down into their belly but not expanding through that rib cage. And we want that expansion through the rib cage, because that's how that diaphragm drops into the lower abdomen, begins to massage out those organs in the lower abdomen, and then we can begin to compress that air back up out of our body.
And this is all very important for how to get a smaller waist, because
all of your abdominal muscles play into your respiration, your breathing, right? Our obliques, yes, they do lateral flexion, side to side rocking, or twisting, rotation, but they also are very, very much involved in breath work. And I think that people underestimate how much the breath work is. If you've got like pelvic floor issues where, you're jumping on a trampoline and you piddle your pants, piddle, yes. That's a thing. If that is something that you're dealing with, then starting with breath work is going to be imperative, because your pelvic floor co-contracts with your transverse abdominis. Your transverse abdominis is like your
Think of it as the deep layer that holds everything.
I like to think of it like a girdle. Like on these old movies where they like tie those girdles like super tight. think of your transverse abdominis like your girdle muscle that holds everything in, but it's also very much involved in breathing, respiration. So if your pelvic floor co-contracts with that respiration or that breathing muscles, then the more we breathe and breathe properly, I'm going to use quotations because there's different definitions of what proper might be, but when we begin to breathe properly and effectively, we can actually begin to train those muscles. Part of that is creating that brain connection with those muscles. We think that we are born and we should be able to use a muscle, but it's like the farthest thing from the truth. It's like you're born and now you have to train your brain how to tap into that muscle. And so sometimes what I do is like get kids to tap on you, like, you know how like they're being annoying, get them to come and tap on that muscle when you're trying to work it, because what it does is it sends a nerve firing to your brain going, something's happening here, somebody's tapping on this, like, and it starts to rewire those synapses and create that ability to start to bring that mindful awareness to that muscle, learning to engage it. If you're ready to make a change in your life, step into the best version of you, check out our Iron Self Transformation Program. Find more info on our website, www.ironbodycoach.com. So breathing is one of those big things to help you really truly begin to engage that abdomen. But we're talking about like if you've got the a C-section, if you had a C-section, or maybe you just don't know how to engage that lower abdomen, I want you, so for men, it feels like you walked into cold water.
Suck your nuts up, guys.
Yeah, your nuts come into your throat. Okay, that's the easiest way to explain it. So you should feel it engage from hip bone to hip bone. For women, it's like you've got one of those like little like sample pee cups that the doctor gives you, and you want to stop the flow of urine so that you don't pee on your hand. Kegels, right? Essentially like a Kegel, right? And so you want to feel that lower abdomen pull in and up, and that tightening happen between your hip bone to hip bone. Now, when I first started to try and learn how to engage my abdomen, I would go into the group fitness class and I would suck in like, and then I would hold my breath so that I could maintain my sucked in abdomen. And I did that for like 2 years, and I would remember the teacher, she'd be like, just engage your core before you do this. I'm like, yeah, super engaged, but I can't
Already
breathe.
got it.
But I can't breathe. And then one day it clicked because I created that brain connection over time, and I was able to, now I can engage it, I can breathe. I'm like engaged right now. Maybe I'm doing a Kegel, who knows? But you know, I'm engaged using my core right now as I sit here and talk to you, but I can still breathe. And that is part of training over time that I've learned how to do that. So beginning to whittle your middle by creating that brain connection and learning how to use all of the muscles in your abdomen, everything from your pelvic floor, transverse abdominis, obliques, and rectus abdominis, right? That six-pack muscle.
Bread loaf.
Yeah, everything begins to work together. And that is one of the biggest things with getting the smaller waist.
Now, one of the big things, too, is that you don't want to overwork your obliques. We were talking about this before we came on. If you overwork your obliques, these guys that do, like she said, like the flexion and the rotation, then you're going to look like a tree trunk. So you're actually going to get wider through the middle because these guys are going to start to tone in.
Yeah, so one of the things that you'll notice is because I compete in bikini competitions, I don't want big obliques. I don't want a tree trunk abdomen. So therefore, I don't do a lot of oblique work. I focus way more on that pelvic floor work, that transverse abdominis work. So I might do things like stomach vacuums. If you want to learn how to do a stomach vacuum, we got a video for you on our YouTube channel. You know, I do a lot more of that transverse abdominis work, holding that girdle muscle in nice and tight. I do a lot of breath work, some Kalapati breathing, which is breath of fire, that plays really, really well into stomach vacuums. But practicing those tightening through the abdomen versus maybe getting sit-ups for days, because that's just going to work your hip flexors and your rectus abdominis, and maybe you'll end up with more of a bread loaf effect than a flat stomach effect. And I think most people are going for the flat stomach. It doesn't matter, male or female.
Now, obliques, I'm not saying are a bad thing, because for the majority of the population that are not going in bikini contests where it's like, I need to be super slim here and then wide at the hips, obliques are great to work, and they will help you slim out too when you were looked at from the side.
It's true. There's nothing wrong with working your obliques, and especially maybe you're doing more higher repetitions versus building muscle specifically. But it's just something to be aware of, is like, what is your body shape? Because every person's body shape is different. And when we are exercising, we are just exemplifying our genetic potential. So if genetically you already have more of that tree trunk waist, maybe you want to forego the obliques specifically. If you notice that, you have more of an hourglass shape, maybe you want to work a little bit of those obliques to get a little bit more definition through the side of the abdomen. So you've got to kind of start to take a look at it with a scientific eye. Now, one of the other things that a lot of people ask us about is waist trainers. Are waist trainers great? I mean, the market out there is huge on waist trainers, and the people on Instagram wearing their waist trainers, everybody's got a waist trainer nowadays. So let's talk a little bit about that. And in with waist trainers, I'm going to also throw in lifting belts, because I think that they're not the same, but they go hand in hand in the sense of it's something wrapped around your abdomen.
Yeah, lifting belts are wrapped around your abdomen to help support your core if you are doing heavy ass lifts. Now, my issue with lifting belts is that you never truly train your core to be able to keep up with everything else. Same thing as like wraps, like hand wraps when you're doing deadlifts, things like that. They're great if you are just working the muscles that you want. Like if you're just trying to work your hamstrings and you got hand wraps on for your deadlifts, 100% they're great for that. But my philosophy is always build your CNS with everything else. So grip strength and your core strength, everything that's working together, I like to work it all together.
I'm more of an aesthetic person. I wear my hand wraps to work my hamstrings. That's what we have different philosophies.
And her grip strength is great.
Yeah.
My
grip strength is not great, but that's okay. So, but like Mike said, with the lifting belts, sometimes you're not necessarily working your core to support you. The big thing with lifting belts is that you're supposed to create a Valsalva effect. So you're actually supposed to press your abdomen into the lifting belt in order to lift it. A lot of people will use it as like a way to brace or support their back. So if you want more information on lifting belts, reach out to us. We are happy to give you our 2 cents and give recommendation for that. Now, when it comes to waist trainers, there's different kinds on the market. Most of them have some form of boning in them to keep them a little bit stronger and rigid. Now, I use the waist trainer when I'm getting closer to competition, only for the sake of for me, it's a mental reminder to tighten through my core. So I don't tighten it as tight as it can go or anything like that. But for me, it's like, okay, I'm already doing all of this like core work. This is just another mental reminder. Hey, stay tight through the core. Pull that lower abdomen in. Now I'm not wearing it for hours and hours and hours on end. It might be, hey, I'm sitting at my desk and I'm going to wear this just for a little bit to remind myself to sit up a little taller, right? Like if you're watching this on video, you'll notice that over time I start to slouch forward. And so having a waist trainer on, I can't get that slouch as much because I have to sit up with it on.
It's like being in a neck brace. You have to stay upright.
You have to stay upright. But a lot of people will wear them during workouts or like other things like that. And to me, it's just compressing your organs, and your last 2 ribs on your rib cage are floating. So it's compressing that all in and kind of pushing it all together versus allowing it to have the space that it needs and using the muscles to create that compression. So my big thing with waist trainers is it's going to be how long you're wearing them, why are you wearing them, and how tight is it? And so, like I said, I wear it to remind myself to sit up taller, might wear it for an hour, maybe 2 hours maximum. They just get uncomfortable. But I'm not wearing it to do my workouts in. I'm not wearing it to really like tighten it in as tight as it can go. And I'm not wearing it for hours and hours and hours on end to create that compression, because that's really all it's doing is just compressing things in and not allowing your body to learn how to engage properly. Things like stomach vacuums and, like I said, Kapalabhati breathing, this is going to help you with that long-term, long-lasting, smaller abdominal approach.
Yeah, perfect.
Now, the last thing that you can do to get a smaller waist, other than sitting up tall, is to start to widen and broaden through your shoulders and your glutes.
This just gives you more of an aesthetic look. So it's not really slimming the waist, you're broadening shoulders and building your boot. Booty.
Your
Booty.
but it does give you that illusion, and I think at the end of the day it's all about the optic illusion. What does it look like? Because that's really what we're trying to do. Can we create a look of a smaller abdomen? Nobody's coming up to you with a measuring tape going, oh well, your waist is this big. You know, it's optically, does it look aesthetically pleasing? If that's the case, we can create more of that hourglass shape by broadening through the hips and the glutes, widening through the shoulders, and that's just going to make your abdomen look smaller altogether. So starting to think about, am I looking for a smaller waist? Like I just need to maybe diet down a little bit, lose some fat? Do I need to begin to create some connection with my abdomen?
Some strength and stability.
Exactly. Or is this, I'm at the point where I'm already quite small and maybe I just need to create more of an optic illusion. If that's the case, we need to change the way in which we're training. Maybe we need to train more volume for your shoulders and your glutes. So really beginning to hone in, what is your goal and where are you currently at, and starting to ask yourself from there. There's lots of things that we can do to help you learn to engage your core, to bring on that connection with your core. So if you want some help with whittling the middle or creating that mind-body connection, make sure you reach out. We love to train core and love to help you figure out how to get your best waist to date. So if you guys love today's episode, make sure you share it with a friend, a family member, or a loved one. Tag us in it on your social media profile. We love to hear from you, and have an amazing rest of your day.
Have a great day, guys.
Bye for now.